atmosphere of it has really changed. It's ever so nice. Of course, it was nice before. But it was hot, wasn't it, all those years ago? And it's still hot now. So our next speaker, Mary, is a personal growth consultant, and as she says, with a difference, and I think you'll find out why. She uses a great many psychological techniques, and she is highly intuitive. Her talk this afternoon is going to be about looking towards the future and learning from the future. And of course, that raises a question in itself, doesn't it? How can we possibly do that? So I think for the next hour, we're going to find out. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mary Hykel Hunt.
I have to say, I always wonder who they're talking about when they do those introductions. Thank you, Sheila. Good to feel welcome. And it's good to be back here again, actually, in spite of the heat. How are you all managing? Before I start my talk, there's just a little bit of admin I need to do with you, actually, because a number of you, as you came in through the door, were randomly distributed with a plain envelope with a little piece of paper in it. Yes? Could you wave them at me? Oh, right. Great. Okay. I bet you wondered what they were for. Okay. What I'm going to ask you to do, we're going to actually conduct an experiment. We're going to have an experiment at the moment, which is going to be a trial for you to see whether you can read the future, whether you can learn from the future. And at the tag end of my talk, I actually have an image on my PowerPoint presentation, which I'm going to flash up on screen. So what I would like you to do now, please, before we begin, is I would like you on that little piece of paper, either to write a word, small phrase, it would have to be small, wouldn't it, because it's only a tiny piece of paper, or to draw some outline or some image on that little sheet of paper that you've got there, and to tuck it in your envelope and to seal it, please. Would you do that for me now? Just tune in to an hour's time. Think of a word. See what image comes into your head. And just jot it down on that piece of paper. How many of you haven't got a pen or a pencil? Could anybody be kind enough to lend you one if you haven't? Great. Okay. I'll just give you a minute or two to do that. And the rest of us can talk about the weather or what it's been like since you've been here today. But what I think I will do is, whilst you're doing that, I'll actually kick off with the talk, because as many of you know, I'm not only a researcher in this field, I'm also an intuitive. And I've functioned as an intuitive since I was small. I can't remember a time when I wasn't able to access future information for people, about people. And the last time I came here, I actually shared with you some of the secrets of the way I do it. I mean, it's not secret at all. It's just, it sounds a bit more bonkers than anything else. But my principal way of accessing information about people and for people is through their name. Now, I'm not going to go on talking about that on this particular occasion. What I actually want to talk to you about is what I've discovered over the last few years is actually, yes, I can access future information for people with a degree of accuracy. People keep coming back, so I must be getting something right. But what I've discovered is that actually we can all do it. And actually, you're all doing it right now. It's just that for most people, it's beneath conscious awareness. And this actually makes it possible to learn from the future, which is why my talk is actually entitled that, because my whole idea today is to actually talk to you about what learning from the future actually involves and how you can do it. By the way, one of the things I very much enjoy is interactive response from my audience. And so please don't wait to the end for questions. If there's something you want to talk to me about, some question you want to ask, please ask it in flow, as it were, and we'll see what we can do with it. Okay? Now, as I've already said, we can all learn from the future. Not just glimpses or guesses, and not just that kind of shift in perspective technique that's so favoured by management training programs. What I'm actually talking about is literally being able to go forward into the future, access information and bring it back, and use it in your present. This isn't just an imaginary process, it is literal, it actually happens. And I found out about it, I found out about it, as I say on the slide, in the best traditions of science by accident. Because I happened to be working with a client some years ago, we'll call him Joe, and he came to me to talk to me, to ask me for some assistance, because he'd reached one of those crossroads places in life that I guess we're all familiar with. Those places where you come to a halt and you know that you cannot carry on doing what you've been doing before, and you actually need to change direction, but you haven't got a clue which direction to go in. And he was at one of those places. So he'd come to me for some guidance, for some assistance, for some information about his future. And something actually occurred to me at that point when I was talking to him about, well, actually, maybe, Joe, you could do something about tapping into your future. And we tried it. We tried a process which basically meant going into a slight trance state, an altered state of awareness. And what happened during the course of that was quite extraordinary. Because what Joe was able to do, he projected himself forward, he projected his awareness forward about 5 years. And he found himself meeting 5 years, from 5 years ahead, he found himself meeting his future self. Now, the future self, interestingly, wasn't just him 5 years older. It actually, his future self was actually symbolic. It presented in a symbolic form. And he found he was able to communicate with this symbolic energy, which was basically a kind of golden, glowing figure. Those of you who are Star Trek fans will probably remember there was an episode with a golden man on the bridge. Well, Joe's future self looked something like this. And he talked, with my encouragement, he talked to this energy being, and he asked him what he was doing. What was he doing 5 years ahead? And the future self told him. He said, well, actually, I'm very, very happy at the moment because I've completely switched career. I went to university to do it, and I took this particular arts course, which involved sculpting and wood carving. And now I've got my own business, and I'm very happy with what I'm doing, thank you. Oh, and by the way, the name of the university was this, the name of the course was this, and the course reference number was this. When Joe emerged from this slight trance state, he looked at me because he was quite skeptical about this kind of thing himself. And he said, that's just, how can that be? You know, how can I have access to that kind of information? That's silly. You know, it's nonsense. So I suggested to him that he went home and he checked it. And 2 days later, I had a gibbering Joe on the end of the phone saying, well, actually, that university does offer that course, and it has that reference number. So once he'd calmed down and collected himself, he'd actually decided that he would go ahead and he would apply to the university, and that's what he went and did. So he actually fulfilled what his future self had actually suggested to him. But what was so interesting about that was the information that Joe had been able to access, because in his present state, typically, you wouldn't expect him to be able to. Now, there are a set of examples I have here. One is Eileen's story, because once I started to notice that people were able to do this, I thought, well, actually, let's just see if Joe could do it. Let's see who else can. Can we do it as a matter of course? And Eileen was a lady She was about 60 years old. She was a widow. And she'd come to see me because of some family issues. She needed some advice and guidance around working with her family. She had grown-up children. They were very dependent on her, both for financial reasons and in terms of time. And she wasn't sure that she was doing the right thing by constantly supporting them, but she wasn't certain about that. And she came to see me to talk this through, and was this something she needed to carry on doing? And so with her, I also suggested that she do what we call the forward or the future progression. She went into a slight trance state. She met her future self from 5 years ahead, and in this instance was somewhat thrown to see that this was a little bent old lady. She found herself walking through a very sort of dark Grimm's fairy tale forest. And she found herself meeting her future self, this little bent old lady, typical Grimm's fairy tale figure, carrying firewood on her back. And she was somewhat horrified, but she said, you can't be my future self. Who are you? And she said, the little old lady said, well, actually, I am you, if you don't change the way you're operating at the moment. And what Eileen did was she scooted back to her starting point, because that was not a future she wanted to embrace. If you think about it, symbolically, she was being told, it was the symbolic quality of the image was actually giving her information about this is not a great place to go, and you need to change the way you're operating within your family, because otherwise you're going to become bent and old and poverty-stricken. So she came back and she decided to choose another path, another future path. And she asked this time to be shown her optimum path, the path that would actually operate for the highest good of everybody involved in the situation. And along this path, she actually met a future self who was very, very different from the little bent old lady with sticks on her back. She actually met somebody who was very confident and very upright and had control of her life. And again, she asked the same type of questions. How am I supposed to deal with my present situation? What am I supposed to do with this? How am I to cope? And one of the things this future self told her was, she reminded her of a dream she'd had many, many years back when she and her husband had first married. And one of the things they'd always wanted to do was to buy a motorhome and go travelling around the country. So believe it or not, what this lady did was, when she came out of a trance, thought about her situation, she went home, and she decided to let her house. She bought a Winnebago and started travelling around Great Britain, leaving her children feeling somewhat, having to fend for themselves, which at the age of 30 wasn't such a bad idea, actually. Overly independent and underly industrious, I think, was the way I best described her. So again, there was an interesting example of how somebody had accessed some future information. Not the same as Joe had done it, but nevertheless very, very cogent, helpful information had come from accessing this future self. And being a Gemini with a Leo ascendant, I can't avoid talking about myself, so I had to stick my own story up here, because actually my own story around this future, accessing future information, is actually quite interesting. Some few years back, I was emerging from quite a difficult relationship. And in my work life at the time, what I was looking at, what I was experimenting with, was altered states of consciousness and what could be perceived and achieved through accessing different states of awareness. And I'd learned that something called the tattvas were actually very useful for achieving this kind of shift in awareness. The tattvas in Indian philosophy they're the 5 elements in Indian philosophy, the 5 elements from which all things are made. I won't go into all the detail of that because I haven't got the time today. But suffice to say that actually you can use each of these symbols, the triangle, the oval, the circle, the square, and the crescent, as portals. Portals through which you can travel. You cross a threshold, an energy threshold, and you actually access, as I said, a different state of awareness. And on this particular occasion, I actually went through the crescent moon. Anybody here old enough to remember Play School on BBC? We're going through the round window. Only today, that particular day, I went through the crescent window. And what I found there was actually quite interesting. I found myself in what looked like a John Constable painting. You know, it was a rutted track with grass growing along it, and the sun was slanting down through the trees. It was very beautiful, but it wasn't exactly what I had anticipated finding through an eastern portal. So I stood there in my mind's eye, in the theatre of my mind, wondering what to do next, and I needn't have worried because around the corner, around the curve of the lane, trotted a unicorn. Now, I have to confess to you that actually, when I do visualizations, when I do image work of any kind, it tends to be very straightforward. I don't do fluffy, I don't do flowery. It's just not the way I seem to work. So having this unicorn trot round the corner was a bit for me to cope with, I have to tell you, because I thought, no, that can't be right. And so I checked it. And those of you who do this kind of inner work know that if you ask something if it is real 3 times, if it isn't, it'll evaporate. And if it is real, it stays. It stayed. So here I was confronting a unicorn, and I didn't know what the heck I was supposed to do with him. So what did he do? But he went down on one knee, like this, and made it very clear I was supposed to get on his back. So with a lot of muttering, I got on his back, and off we flew. And then I found we were flying over sea towards an island, and on the island was a little hillock. And on the top of the hillock, yes, was a castle. It was a Walt Disney industry standard, you know, pennants, turrets, the whole bang shoot. You know, it looked like a Barbie castle. And again, I thought, this can't be right. I don't do things like this. This is not the kind of imagery I typically produce. But it wouldn't go away. And this unicorn took me down and landed me in front of the castle steps. Only just as I arrived there, guess what? Around the whole thing, there suddenly erupted briars, thorn bushes, blocking my way up the steps. And it went round the whole structure. I was getting very annoyed with myself by now, I can assure you. Because what should drop into my hand as I was standing there thinking, well, what the heck do I do now, was a sword. This was all this classic stuff that I don't do. So yes, I was supposed to hack my way up through the briars and the brambles and the thorn bushes to the main door, which was a great big Gothic arch, and walk through the arch into a stone hall, totally bare, apart from a plinth in the middle, a stone plinth. And on the plinth, there rested a stone knight in stone armour. And again, I stood there waiting for something to happen until it dawned on me that I was supposed to do the classic thing, and I was supposed to kiss this. At least it wasn't a frog. So again, I was resisting the whole thing, and was thinking, this is too sort of gooey for words. I don't do this kind of thing. But nothing was shifting in this image, and I knew I wasn't going to get anywhere until I actually kissed this knight. So guess what happened when I kissed him? Yes? He woke up. And he became human. And actually, as he became human, I have to tell you, I looked at him and I thought, well, actually, you don't look too bad. Right, quite fanciable, really. And he took my hand and he walked me to the main door of this Gothic arch, and then there were thousands of people out there, you know, and I thought, that's typical. Where were they all when I needed help packing my way through all those thorn bushes? You know, suddenly they appeared. And at that point, I mean, it was quite clear that the whole thing was, I was being greeted. This was a partnership that was being celebrated. And I came out of that visualization wondering what the heck it had been about, because it had absolutely no bearing on my life at the time. Also, I thought, because within a matter of months, I actually walked straight into, in my business life, I walked into the Stone Knight. He appeared at a business meeting. And I nearly fainted. Because he had no business being in real life. He was part of my visualization. But yes, there he was. And I'm going to cut a long and convoluted story short because it involved a lot of me having to be pursued and me saying no. But yes, reader, I married him, okay? Because he is now my husband. And it took me some time to actually pluck up the courage to tell him, well, actually, I knew about you before. But fortunately, he was completely all right with all of this and didn't feel trapped, which was good news. But here were three instances of somehow information from the future being accessed, and not just by me. And I began experimenting. I began talking to people, other people I was working with, and getting them to try this technique with me, because I was slowly evolving a technique for how you access the future. And we use it for big issues and small issues. And it works. It works. And I began asking questions about this, and in fact, I'm currently involved in a lot of research around this at the moment, because the way I was figuring it was, well, okay, we all seem okay with the idea of past life regression, so if we can do past life regression, why can't we go forward? Good question. Well, as I began my research into this, I came up against one almighty obstacle, a four-letter word that none of us likes very much, and it's called time. Because our concept of time, our perception of time seems to be what causes the problem. As to why most of us think we can't access the future, because we insist, we are brought up, our whole culture supports us in thinking of time as linear, straight line. Past, present, future. And I will tell you for free, it's taken me a long time to disengage myself from that notion, because in actual fact, that is not the case. Time, fortunately, I think I'm preaching to the converted here, aren't I? You don't need telling about this. Time doesn't exist in that straight line. Actually, it's all a series of nows. Nows, all a series of nows, out of which any future, all kinds of futures are possible from the seed of now. It's too hot for me to go into the quantum science of this, because my brain fried on it when it was in the middle of winter when I was talking about it. But, as it says on the screen, time knows no tenses. There is no past, present, and future in time. It's our perception of time that keeps getting in the way. Because, in fact, time is not a measure of duration. It's actually a measure of change. And I'm in good company in saying that, because Brian Greene is a world-famous physicist at Columbia University, and he actually calls it time. Time is the bookkeeper of change. We only notice time has elapsed because things alter, things change. So if we can get over this first hurdle of unwedding ourselves from seeing time as straight lines and us travelling along towards a future from a past, we help ourselves enormously. in understanding how we can access futures, our futures. Because the other thing I want to talk to you about is that you don't just have, none of us has just one set, fixed future. Each one of us, as I stand here, as you sit there, is weaving and reweaving our future. Now, we weave it and reweave it with choices and decisions we make. And they're not just the big decisions, shall I buy that house? Shall I leave my job? They're the tiny decisions, too, that make an incredible difference to what future we bring in. Anybody here seen the film Sliding Doors with Gwyneth Paltrow? Yeah? Do you remember the basis of that storyline? She turns one way out of the lift, do you remember? And she creates one life. And extraordinarily, what they show you in that film is they show what happens if she turns the other way out of the lift. It's the idea of multiple universes, yes? Are you familiar with the idea? That actually there are numbers of possible futures, and we can access them depending on what choices we make. Something as simple as whether we turn right or left. I call it the Weetabix or cornflakes conundrum myself, because the example I usually give is, okay, there you are, you get up, you're having your breakfast, you decide you want cornflakes instead of Weetabix, and you empty the box, it's the last of the box. So on the way back from work that evening, you decide, I must go and pick up some more cornflakes. And as you're standing in the queue, minding your own business, the checkout, you happen to bump into somebody you know, who, as you're chatting, she suddenly tells you, there's a vacancy cropping up in the office, da-da-da-da, and you decide to apply for it. Long story short, you've changed your job. Now, it's too simplistic to say you've changed your job just because you decided to have cornflakes, but can you see the connection? Because what if you'd had Weetabix? Would the same future have emerged? Well, it might have, but it would have emerged differently. And it would have set in train a whole different set of possibilities. So when people talk about the importance of now, and people do, and quite rightly so, part of the importance of now is what future you're growing in the now, out of which choice, which decision you make. And one thing I also want to say here is that as an intuitive, my experience actually supports this idea of multiple options, multiple universes. Because when I actually work with people, when I read with people, and they ask me a question about job, relationship, one of the three jugular themes, job, relationship, health, okay? Spiritual direction possibly comes in occasionally, but those are the three jugular themes people come and ask me about. What I see when I work with somebody is I do something that I call looking down their timeline. And what happens for me is I see the person where they are now, and I see a network of possibilities rolling out from them. And as a clairvoyant, as an intuitive, what I actually see, if I can get this to work, it's something as confusing as that, and I haven't put all the options in, because I was getting confused doing this as I was building it on the computer. But can you see the little yellow line running through it? That's what I call the path of greatest probability. So that when I'm working with somebody, right now, they're asking me a question, will I get that job? Will I sell my house? As I'm looking down their timeline, I'll see the path of greatest probability lighting up. It happens super quick, it happens very quickly, and that's where my answer comes from. Now, of course, what you can do is you can either go along with what I've said, or you can go out the door and you say, nah, don't want to do that. Why? Because you have free will. There is no such thing as one concrete future, and no clairvoyant should tell you that there's only one possible future. Many years ago, I was actually told by a palmist who looked at my hand, she informed me quite roundly that I would never have another relationship in my life. Now, at 42, I could have been a bit disheartened about that, couldn't I? In fact, I wasn't disheartened, I got annoyed. And in becoming annoyed, what I did was I overrode it and I said, no, we're not having that. That's not the way it's going to be. And as you've just learned, it wasn't. So I did find another relationship. So just because you're told something, please, by an intuitive, do not let it trap you. Because if you don't like it, change it. You have free will. So, coming back to this idea of paths of greatest probability, yes, okay, that's what I'll typically see, but you can change that. Because, as you can see, because of the impact of free will. And because I'm dealing in probabilities, not concrete certainties, that must mean there are, as you can see from that chart we had on the board, on the slide, there are all sorts of options available to you. All sorts of options. Now this becomes very exciting because putting that together with what I was discovering working with people, that you can actually access your future. You can access your futures. You can go and investigate them. You can have a look at them. You can talk to the future self from 3 or 5 years ahead. I have a friend who's, I won't tell you, I was just about to say where she's living at the moment, but that would spoil the story. She came to me after several years of quite a nomadic existence. She'd trotted around the country caring for family. She decided she wanted to buy a house and settle down. She'd had enough of this. So she came to see me with the house details from the estate agent. She'd made her mind up. This was the house she was going to buy. She only brought it to me for a rubber stamping exercise. So I don't know what imp it was in me that suggested this, but we tried out the future self idea. I said, why don't you go and check with your future self from about 3 years' time and find out, what happened? So we went through the process, and she was so surprised when she said to her future self from 3 years ahead, you did buy that house, didn't you? And she said, no, I didn't. Why not? Says present self. Future self said, well, because there's this wrong, and this wrong with it. You better go and check. So she did. And there were these things wrong with it. So she decided not to buy the house. But she would, if she hadn't checked with the future self, she would have not found out what the problems were with the house, and she would have gone ahead and bought it. And she's currently now living in Findhorn. And very happy, thank you very much there. So, as you can see from the slide, I maintain it's possible for any of us to access this kind of information. And I'm making 2 more contentious statements here, because we appear to be doing this all the time anyway, and we just need to learn to do it consciously. Okay? You're being terribly quiet. Are you asleep? Oh, that's much better. I'm going to wear shades, I think, because I can actually see you all now, because the lights in my eyes are stopping me seeing you all. Okay. Now, because I was waiting for you to sort of throw rotten tomatoes at me and the rest of it and say, oh, Mary, that can't be right, I've also dug up some other current information and current findings that are supporting this idea that we are actually going forward, we are accessing information from the future. You must have heard of Dean Radin, yes? And are you aware of his going into the future experiments? Have you heard of them? Yeah? No? That's interesting. There's a lady here nodding her head and saying no. No, that's quite a skill. Dean Radin's done some amazing work and is continuing to do some amazing work. showing how people are going forward into the future and accessing information. And he's doing this by, he wires people up to a computer screen. And the whole idea is that onto the screen pop up a variety of images, a variety of pictures. And some of them are what are known as neutral images. They don't create an emotion. And some of them are emotive images. They trigger an emotional response when you look at them. And to carry out this experiment, what he did was what he does is he wires people up. It's called galvanic skin response, is what he's registering, is what he's looking for, because we register emotion through something called galvanic skin response, which it appears on a readout. And what he found with his experiment was he'd present an image, he would tell the participant to expect to see an image on the screen. There would be a 5-second that they would press a button to bring the image onto the screen. There would be a 5-second delay, and then the image would appear. Now, it all turned out as everybody expected. Yes, of course, people responded to the images on the screen, but what Dean Radin has found out, is very, very interesting, is actually they began emoting, they began producing a response before the image appeared. How did they know that? How did they know whether or not it was going to be an emotive or neutral image? But again and again, he has replicated this experiment, and it's been replicated by others around the world. This experiment demonstrates that at least by 5 seconds, we're ahead of the game. We know what's going to happen. Okay? There's also something that Dean Radin and others are involved in. And again, I'm sure in this audience you must know about the Global Consciousness Project. Yeah? Yeah? And one of the fascinating things about this particular project is it's demonstrating the same thing, only on a mass scale, that we seem to be able to anticipate, know what the future is. One of the classic experiments, one of the classic results from this was the Global Consciousness Project operates on the basis of a number of what are known as random number generators around the world. They do exactly what they say on the tin. They generate numbers randomly, okay? Was that my earring? Sorry. These machines generate numbers randomly. And they have them running all around the world, constantly. And what they've noticed is that if something of global importance occurs, something like, for example, the funeral of Diana, or 9/11, it registers on these random number generators. They stop being random. Not only is it doing that, not only is it registering a change on this global level, but certainly in the case of 9/11, it started 2 hours before the event occurred. So again, it's not just on this little scale, it's on this big scale that we seem to be able to anticipate the future. All right, now, what would you do if you really believed me this afternoon? How would you feel about this? Excited? I mean, look. Great. Great. Fantastic. Anybody else brave enough to comment? Give it a try. Yes. Nobody said scared yet. Right. Because the whole point is, it's not, the idea behind this is not just trying to make an easier future or a better future in the sense of, oh, I'd never have any money worries or anything of that kind. What we're looking for here is the optimum future, that which is best, that which is for the highest good, not just for myself, but for everybody involved in it. And that has actually certainly led to some very interesting outcomes for folk when they followed it through. You see, behind all the work that I do, if I have a mission at all in life, it's actually my mission is to get people to see that they are their own best predictors. You can do this. I know you can. And if you need any help, there's a CD or two out there that you could purchase to help you with it. Am I allowed to do that plug? Let me come back to this list here of other people. Ben Libet. Now, this is a very interesting case because Ben Libet was a neurophysiologist who 30 years ago was discovering interesting things about what the human brain was capable of. Because he took patients who were actually undergoing brain surgery. And it was open brain surgery whilst the person was conscious. I think they're terribly brave to do that myself, but so he was conducting these experiments and discovered that if he were to stimulate the left hand and at the same time, on the open brain, stimulate the left cortex so that it produced a response in the right hand. Yes? Are you with me? Am I with me? You would expect in a situation like that the direct stimulus to the brain would be felt immediately and before stimulus rather to the right hand, okay? Because it's got longer to travel. To the left hand. Keep up with me. Right. Because this would have longer to travel to get to the brain, yes? What he discovered was the opposite, that actually somehow the stimulus to the left hand was registering quicker than the direct stimulus to the brain itself. How? This, for 30 years, has created a lot of contention in medical and scientific circles because there are all sorts of things that are being said about it. But from my perspective, I find it very interesting because it sounded to me like we were reading from the future again. And was it? Yes, it's possible, yes. Energetically, yes, that would be possible, absolutely. The other two categories I've got on the slide, I'm not going to go into in any detail. A, because I'm sure you've all, if you've seen The Secret, you'll all be very well up on the double slit experiment, where photons of light seem to be able to change the present from the future, which is very interesting. And currently, there is a very interesting experiment being put together by somebody called John Kramer at the University of Washington, in which he's working on receiving a signal before it's sent. I can't wait. Because when he's cracked that one, and he's not that far off, I'm sure, when he's cracked that one, I'm going to be throwing a party, and you're all welcome, because it'll really be supporting the things that I, in my little universe, am discovering. Any questions before we continue? Yep?
How do you put people into this trance?
Well anticipated. Just about to talk about that. See? QED. Anything else? It's just so I can see everybody in the back there.
Are you accessing inner wisdom?
Say again?
Are you helping people to access their own inner wisdom?
Yes.
Their own knowing?
Yes. Yes. However, that wisdom is structured, but it's certainly sitting with the idea of being able to. The trouble is, I'm always foxed by the language I have to use, because this notion of past, present, and future is so embedded in our language that we can't get away from it. It's very, very difficult to talk to people about the future without going forward and talking about going forward. But what I'm trying to answer, how I'm trying to answer your question is, yes, I do believe it's accessing inner wisdom. However, that inner wisdom is structured and wherever it may be. Anything else anybody'd like to ask before we carry on? What about synchronicity? Oh, synchronicity is fascinating. Personally, I always see synchronicities as lights on the runway. When synchronicities, when you get a sequence of synchronicities happening around you, it's telling you you're on the right path, is how I see synchronicity. Of themselves, they may carry other information. They may have a theme, which it would be useful to pay attention to. If you're thick like me, it takes a bit of time and it has to be repeated. Forget the rule of 3 with me. It's got to be at least the rule of 6. And but primarily for me, synchronicities are basically always, they're talking about these are the lights on the runway. You're going the right way. This is the path. Okay? One of the things, because I'm slap bang in the middle of doing research around all of this, a lot of what I can talk to you about at the moment can only be what's known as anecdotal. And in the world of science, anecdote doesn't count. There may be a weight of evidence, but unless it's scientific and replicable, it doesn't count. But one of the things that I've noticed is that the basis of being able to access this future seems to rest on, it's to do with this particular shift in awareness. It's to do with this altered state of consciousness. And you're all aware, presumably, of the 4 principal states of consciousness, the beta, alpha, theta, and delta. And I've always said that it's when you're around theta that miracles start to happen. Because when we move out of the consciousness and we move into the substrata and the other areas of awareness, we seem able to produce miracles. And to me, it seems to require this deliberate stepping out of an ordinary frame of mind. Now, having said that, I'm smiling at myself, I'm laughing at myself, because you see, very often I get my best hits when I'm doing something mundane, like the ironing, or peeling potatoes or something. Do you find that it's when you're doing something repetitive that suddenly something goes ping in, and you just know?
That's itself an altered state of consciousness.
Yes. And we got there without even trying. Try ironing, fellas. That's a whole novel thought. Right. But at the moment, you see, what makes me think about this is it was my experience and my continued experience of working with the tatwas. Now, those are known to help engender shifts in awareness. Going through the triangle, going through the circle. And they're very ancient. I mean, those images are thousands of years old. I know they're very simple, but their energy is thousands of years old. So at the moment, what I'm looking at, what I want to experiment with, is this notion of shifting consciousness, yes, but where to? What might be the brainwave cycle that actually achieves that? At the moment, I haven't got a clue how to get there, but I'll be working on some experimental design to see what we can achieve with that. The other thing that I have been told again and again is that the voice seems to have something to do with helping induce the necessary state. Now, for many years, I've worked with people doing image work and visualization. And again I've been told that my voice actually, something to do with the timbre of my voice, actually helps people make that shift. Please, God, don't let that be true, because otherwise I sent you all to sleep this afternoon. Although I am, in fact, being asked to sort of do an insomnia CD to help people sleep. So I've been working very hard to keep my voice going up and down today to stop sending you all off to sleep. But seriously, it raises a question for me, because the number of times I'm told this, and have been told this for 25, 30 years, this cannot be an accident. May there be something to do with a sound that can help achieve a particular state of awareness? Could it be that some kind of energy vibration helps move us through into that place where we can access the future? These are some really interesting questions, I think, that we could explore. And then there's the role of consciousness. Consciousness, there's a big question. What is it? Where does it come from? Where does it live? You're all conscious, I hope. What is consciousness? It's the final frontier, I think. What is consciousness? What is this? And what can we do with it? Because in the work that I'm doing, it clearly, somehow we can use our awareness, our consciousness, to transcend time. And the other question that this raises for me is, and this I think has some strong links with principles of manifestation, how we manifest, the work of The Secret, for example. How might our perceptions of time be trapping us? Because as I started off this talk describing, we are brought up in a culture, we're brought up in a global culture that insists on seeing time in that linear form and never agrees that we can step out of that, or that it isn't actually the reality. How might we be being imprisoned by our perception of time? And if we could take ourselves out of it, what might be possible for us? This has strong ties across to, as I said earlier, the principles of manifesting. Because I believe, yes, I do believe that we can create whatever we want to create. But it's not as simple as simply producing a wish list. Because I believe that manifesting, if you seek to manifest, it brings you into contact directly with two things. Unavoidably, you start working on yourself. You have to. Because the law of attraction states you attract what you are. Yes? Now, I could carry on thinking, well, yes, all right, if I attract what I am, well, that's all right, I just have to think nice thoughts. You know, just emulate the L'Oreal advert, because I'm worth it. But if it's only the top part of my awareness is thinking that, my logical brain is thinking that, and the rest of me is actually, which is the unconscious part of me, which is where all the governors live, and that unconscious part of me that's been shaped by my experience, past experience, sorry about the time words again, but I can't avoid it, my past experience, not just in this life, but in other lives. What about that part of me? And the way you find out what that part is doing is you notice what you're thinking when you're not thinking. What I always encourage people to do is notice what you're thinking. Stop when you're driving. Don't stop when you're driving, but stop when you're driving. And notice what kind of thoughts you're having. What's your ground zero thinking? What's your natural state of belief? And time again, people suddenly realize that what they're actually doing is that most people are often in a state of fear. It's unformed, it's incoherent, it's not necessarily focused, but they live on a foundation of fear. And it's that that's got to change, because if we go back to the initial law, you attract what you are. So any manifesting has got, unless I've got some supremely enlightened beings in here, and I could have, it's true, we're all having to work on ourselves. So I know that if I am not creating what I would like to create, then something is stopping that. And one of the first places I need to look is me. Yeah? Yeah. Not out there. Not blame somebody else. It's me. I've got to look at me. And believe me, I do. And believe me, I do. How much more time have I got, Sheila? 5 minutes, okay. So this whole thing has actually left me, or gives me, many, many questions to ask, because I know, I cannot leave here today, I know we can access the future. I've seen people do it. I've helped people do it.
Can you sheepfold and sell us the lottery numbers?
That's classic, actually. That's a classic question. I've never known anybody actually ask for that before. And I think it's possible, theoretically possible. But then I also think that sitting behind that are those principles of manifestation I was talking about just now.
What was the question?
About the lottery numbers. Sorry, I didn't hear that.
You would be in competition with another 10 million.
This is true, yes. Bruce Almighty, there's another good film. Have you seen that one? Where everybody wins the lottery, yes? And they all get terribly annoyed because all they got was $1, I think. So,
Can I ask a question about fear?
yes?
It occurs to me if I go into the future 3 or 5 years from now, I'll be going beyond 2012.
Yes.
Have you had any people doing that who've said, oh, Armageddon's happened, I don't have a future?
I know who this is. This is Claire, yes?
Yes.
Hello, Claire. I recognise your voice. It's a good question, Claire. And yes, I have had people going past 2012, and apparently Armageddon doesn't happen. Not in the sense that we know it, Jim, I think. It's very interesting. I haven't got time to talk about what spins out of that right now, because I'm going to have Sheila breathing down my neck any minute now. 3 minutes. But the short answer is no, Claire, so come and talk to me afterwards. Good question, though. Because in the meantime, what I want to do is... Why doesn't this thing work when I want it to? There we go. I want to share with you one of my favourite quotes of all time from a wonderful book, ostensibly written for children, called The Dark is Rising. Has anybody read it? The Dark is Rising? Fantastic book. Appalling film made of it recently. There's not really any before and after, is there? Everything that matters is outside time and comes from there and can go there. Now, the next one says, any questions? Well, pass. And now's the time for you to open your envelopes. Come on then, let's see what happened with these envelopes. We ought to have a little drum roll now, really. No. Okay? It doesn't have to be absolutely on the nail. You could have a shape, or you could have written down tower, or pointy thing, anything. Did anybody get anywhere close? Hands up, please. Aha! Say again? encouragement. No experiment. Yes? A tower. Anybody else have towers? Yes?
It's two of the tactwords, actually. And I've got the word merge.
All right. Okay. Well, as experiments go, come and talk to me afterwards. Show me what you got, because I'll be very interested. As experiments go, this can only be a very loose experiment. But what I want to say, apart from anything else, is it's been absolutely great talking to you again this afternoon, and thank you for being so attentive. And go and see how you can learn from your future. Okay?
Thank you very much, Mary Hykel Hunt. Thank you.
Oh.